Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases ever recorded in the history of Jefferson County, Georgia. A tale that remained buried in dusty archives for over a century, only to resurface during a courthouse renovation in 1963. Before we delve into the shadows of Harcourt Estate, I must warn you, what you're about to hear isn't a ghost story. There are no supernatural elements here, just the darkness that lurks within the human heart. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters wear familiar faces. In the summer of 1841, the prestigious Harcourt family owned one of the largest plantations in Jefferson County, Georgia. Sprawling fields of cotton stretched as far as the eye could see, with the grand white-columned manor house standing as a testament to their wealth and status. According to county records, the Harcourt estate employed over 60 enslaved individuals, though surviving documents suggest the actual number may have been much higher. The family was known for their refined taste, social connections, and fierce protection of their reputation. What happened on those grounds during that fateful summer remained undocumented in official histories. No newspaper of the time dared to print the story. The family name was too powerful, too connected. But in a small leather-bound journal, discovered hidden within a false panel in the library wall during the courthouse renovation of 1963, the truth had been preserved in faded ink, written in a delicate feminine hand. The journal belonged to Anna Harcourt, the eldest daughter of the family. Her words, coupled with court documents sealed by judicial order until 1950, pieced together a disturbing narrative of obsession, betrayal, and calculated cruelty. The Harcourt sisters, Anna and Lucille, were considered among the most eligible young women in Jefferson County society. Anna, at 23, was known for her intelligence and composure, while Lucille, 20 years of age, was admired for her beauty and charm. According to social records and correspondence from neighboring families, the sisters maintained an unusually close relationship, rarely seen apart at social gatherings. Their father, Judge William Harcourt, had been widowed 10 years prior, and according to his personal correspondence, harbored ambitious plans to see his daughters married into families that would strengthen his political aspirations. What no one in polite society could have suspected was the terrible secret that would unfold behind the pristine white columns of the Harcourt mansion, a secret that would ultimately lead to tragedy for all involved. According to Anna's journal, the catalyst for what happened was the arrival of a new enslaved person on the property in early April of 1841. His name, according to the plantation's property ledger, was Elijah Brooks. He had been purchased from a plantation in South Carolina, where he had served as a house servant. The ledger described him as 26 years of age, literate, well-mannered, and of strong constitution. What the cold, practical words of the ledger failed to capture was the impact his arrival would have on the Harcourt household, particularly on the two sisters. Anna's journal entries from April 1841 reveal a household in subtle transition. Judge Harcourt had assigned Elijah to work primarily in the main house, attending to the library and serving as the judge's personal attendant. Anna describes her first encounter with Elijah in measured terms, noting his uncommon education and dignified bearing despite his circumstances. Her early entries suggest a cautious respect, unusual for the time and social context. Lucille's reaction to Elijah's arrival was not documented firsthand, but Anna's journal mentions her sister's immediate and persistent interest in the new house servant. According to Anna's observations, Lucille began to spend unusual amounts of time in the library, a room she had previously shown little interest in. The household staff, according to later testimonies, noticed the younger Miss Harcourt's behavior but dared not speak of it. By May of 1841, Anna's journal entries become more frequent and increasingly personal. She writes of conversations with Elijah about books in her father's library, discussions that would have been considered highly inappropriate by societal standards. She notes his knowledge of literature, philosophy, and even law, subjects he had apparently been exposed to in his previous household. Anna writes, "Today I discovered E. has read more Locke than most gentlemen of my acquaintance. His insights on natural rights were so profound, I nearly forgot the unnatural circumstances of our discussion." As spring turned to summer, the journal entries reveal a household balanced on the edge of propriety, with dangerous currents flowing beneath the surface. Judge Harcourt, according to county records, was frequently away in Atlanta, involved in legal proceedings that kept him from home for weeks at a time. During these absences, Anna's journal suggests that boundaries within the household began to blur in ways that would have scandalized Jefferson County society. From court documents unsealed in 1950, we know that rumors eventually began to circulate among the neighboring plantations. A letter from Mrs. Eleanor Pembroke to her sister in Savannah, dated June 1841, mentions disturbing whispers regarding the Harcourt girls and their unusual household management in their father's absence. The letter suggests that certain members of local society had begun to distance themselves from the sisters, declining invitations and limiting social calls. The true nature of what was happening at the Harcourt estate is revealed in Anna's increasingly candid journal entries from June and July. She writes of forbidden conversations beneath the willow grove, and moments stolen in the shadows of the library when the house has gone quiet. Though never explicitly stated, her entries strongly suggest that both sisters had developed inappropriate attachments to Elijah, attachments that went far beyond the acceptable boundaries of the time. On July 3, 1841, Anna writes, "L confronted me today. Her eyes held such accusation that I could barely meet her gaze. 'I've seen how you look at him,' she said. I could not deny it, though I tried. What could I say when her own glances mirror mine? We who have shared everything now find ourselves divided by the same desire. I fear what this will do to us." The situation deteriorated rapidly after this confrontation. According to Anna's journal, the sisters began to compete for Elijah's attention in subtle ways. They assigned him tasks that would bring him into their presence, created reasons to be alone with him, and, if Anna's more cryptic entries are to be interpreted correctly, perhaps crossed lines that would have been not just socially unacceptable, but legally dangerous in antebellum Georgia. A household staff member, Sarah Jenkins, provided testimony in a sealed court document dated September 1841, stating that the atmosphere in the house became thick with tension. The sisters barely spoke to each other at meals. Miss Lucille would glare at Miss Anna whenever she addressed the new house servant. And he, poor soul, seemed to walk as though on eggshells, knowing perhaps that his very life balanced on the edge of the sisters' rivalry. On August 9th, Anna's journal records a disturbing development. L came to my room after midnight, her face streaked with tears. "You can't have him," she whispered fiercely. "I won't allow it." When I reminded her of our position of reality, she laughed in a manner that chilled me. "There are ways," she said. "Father would believe anything I told him about that man." I recognized the threat immediately. She would destroy him rather than see him with me. What happened next is documented both in Anna's journal and in sealed court records. On August 15th, Judge Harcourt returned unexpectedly from Atlanta. According to the household staff's later testimony, he arrived in a state of considerable agitation, having apparently received a letter that had cut his business short. He immediately called for Elijah to be brought to his study. Anna's journal entry from that day is frantic and blotched with what appear to be tear stains. It was L. She sent father a letter claiming the most terrible falsehoods about E's behavior toward me, accusations that would see him hanged. When I confronted her, she simply said, "If I cannot have him, neither shall you." I have never seen such cold determination in my sister's eyes. What has our rivalry transformed her into? What has it done to us both? Court records indicate that Elijah Brooks was accused of inappropriate conduct and attempted liberties with one of the Harcourt daughters. In the climate of 1841, Georgia, such accusations against an enslaved person were effectively a death sentence, requiring little evidence beyond the word of a white woman of standing. Judge Harcourt, according to his own written statement preserved in the court documents, ordered Elijah to be locked in the storage cellar until the sheriff could be summoned in the morning. What happened that night is pieced together from multiple sources: Anna's journal, staff testimonies, and the subsequent investigation records. According to Anna's entry, dated August 16th, but clearly written in the pre-dawn hours, "I cannot allow this injustice. El's jealousy has doomed an innocent man. I went to him tonight, key in hand, determined to at least give him the chance to flee. But the cellar was already unlocked. The door stood open. E was gone, and on the floor, blood. So much blood. The official investigation report filed by Sheriff Thomas Montgomery states that at approximately 4 o'clock in the morning on August 16th, 1841, the body of Lucille Harcourt was discovered at the base of the cellar steps at Harcourt Estate. Her throat had been cut with what appeared to be a straight razor. Elijah Brooks was missing from the property, and an immediate manhunt was organized. Anna's journal entry from later that day reads simply, "They blame him. Of course they do. No one questions how he obtained the key, how the daughter of a judge could be overcome so easily. No one asks who had reason to want both E gone and L silenced. And I say nothing. My silence indicts him as surely as if I held the razor myself." For 6 days, search parties combed the surrounding counties for Elijah Brooks. According to Sheriff Montgomery's reports, on August 22nd, a body matching his description was found hanging from an oak tree near the Savannah River, approximately 20 miles from the Harcourt estate. The report notes that the body was in such a condition as to make positive identification difficult, but was presumed to be the fugitive based on clothing and general appearance. The official verdict recorded in Jefferson County records states that Elijah Brooks murdered Lucille Harcourt while attempting to escape, and subsequently took his own life or was killed by persons unknown before he could be apprehended. The case was considered closed, but Anna's journal tells a different story. In an entry dated September 3rd, she writes, "They buried a stranger under E's name. I know because I saw him last night. He came to my window just as we had planned before everything went wrong. I didn't kill her," he whispered. I told him I knew. He asked if I had done it. I couldn't answer. The weight of my silence hung between us like a shroud. When he turned to leave, I didn't stop him. Some crimes have no atonement. The truth of what happened in the cellar of Harcourt Estate on the night of August 15th, 1841, may never be fully known. Did Elijah Brooks kill Lucille Harcourt in a desperate bid for freedom? Did Anna Harcourt, as her cryptic journal entry suggests, murder her own sister to prevent Elijah's execution and clear his path to escape? Or was there another actor in this tragedy? Perhaps someone from the household staff with their own motivations. What we do know from subsequent records is that Anna Harcourt never married. After her father's death in 1849, she continued to live at the estate, increasingly reclusive, according to accounts from neighboring families. A letter from one Mrs. Josephine Caldwell to her daughter in 1852 mentions that Miss Harcourt has become a ghost in her own home, rarely seen in town, and rumoured to spend her days in the library or walking the grounds at dusk. Some say they've heard her speaking to herself near the old willow grove, as though conversing with an unseen companion. Anna Harcourt died in 1873 at the age of 55. According to her will, discovered with her journal, She requested to be buried not in the family plot, but beneath the willow grove on the eastern edge of the property. Her final journal entry, dated just 3 days before her death, reads, "I have carried the weight of that night for 32 years. Sometimes I imagine a different life, one where society's boundaries did not exist, where one could love freely, regardless of station or circumstance. But then I remember the price of such dreams, my sister's blood on stone steps, a man condemned to a lifetime of hiding. Was it worth it? The question haunts me still. Tonight, I thought I saw him watching from the edge of the trees, older as I am older, but still standing with that same dignity, waiting perhaps to ask me the same question when we meet in whatever comes after this life." In 1968, during an archaeological survey of the former Harcourt estate, which by then had fallen into disrepair and been purchased by Jefferson County for historical preservation, workers discovered a small cabin hidden deep in the woods, approximately 3 miles from the main house. Carbon dating of artifacts found at the site suggested it had been inhabited from approximately 1841 until the late 1870s. Among the items discovered was a carved wooden box containing a lock of blonde hair tied with a faded blue ribbon, and a page torn from a volume of John Locke's Second Treatise of Government, with a handwritten note in the margin that reads simply, A. I forgive you. Do you forgive yourself? E. The Harcourt case was officially closed in 1841 and has never been reopened. The journal, letters, and court documents remain in the Jefferson County Historical Archive, catalogued among the many tragic stories of America's troubled past. The estate itself was eventually restored as a historical site, though tour guides make no mention of Elijah Brooks or the fate of the Harcourt sisters. The willow grove where Anna Harcourt was buried has long since been reclaimed by the surrounding forest. Some local residents claim that on summer nights, when the moon is high and the air is still, they can hear the sound of whispered conversations coming from the old willow grove, a woman's voice and a man's, locked in eternal dialogue about love, betrayal, and forgiveness. But such stories are merely local folklore, the kind that grows around any place where human passions once ran deep enough to spill blood. What remains are only fragments of evidence pointing to a truth perhaps too complex for the binary morality of the time, or even of our own. In the silence of archives and the whispers of history, the story of Anna and Lucille Harcourt and Elijah Brooks reminds us that behind the sanitized narratives of the past lie human beings trapped in the constraints of their time, capable of both profound love and terrible betrayal. And sometimes the most haunting ghosts are not the supernatural kind, but the lingering questions of what really happened on warm summer nights long ago, when 3 people found themselves caught in a triangle from which none would emerge unscathed. The Jefferson County Historical Society closed its investigation into the Harcourt case in 1969, citing insufficient evidence to determine the true sequence of events. The Journal of Anna Harcourt, the primary source of information about the case, was subsequently stored in a climate-controlled archive, where it remains to this day, its pages slowly fading, taking its secrets with it into the dust of history. And yet, the questions remain. Who really killed Lucille Harcourt? Did Elijah Brooks survive and live out his days in hiding just miles from the place of his alleged crime? Did Anna Harcourt betray her sister for the man they both desired, or was she merely an accessory after the fact, helping him escape a false accusation? The answers, if they exist at all, are lost to time. Perhaps the most telling piece of evidence is the simplest. In the family plot of the Harcourt estate, 8 generations of the family lie buried together, except for 2. Lucille, whose grave is marked by a stone angel with its face weathered away by time and elements, lies alone on the western edge of the cemetery. And Anna, by her own request, rests beneath what was once a willow grove, separated from her family in death, as she apparently was in life. In the autumn of 1969, shortly before the Historical Society closed its reinvestigation, an elderly woman named Margaret Jenkins came forward, claiming to be the granddaughter of Sarah Jenkins, who had been a house servant at the Harcourt estate in 1841. According to a recorded interview, Margaret's grandmother had told her a story passed down in their family, that on the night Lucille Harcourt died, Sarah Jenkins had seen Anna Harcourt returning to her bedroom before dawn, her white nightdress stained with what looked like blood. When Sarah questioned her, Anna had simply said, "Some prices must be paid for freedom. Remember that, should anyone ask." The interviewer noted that Margaret Jenkins was 87 at the time of the interview and that her account was, at best, third-hand information from over a century prior. Her testimony was included in the file, but not considered conclusive evidence. The last official document relating to the case is a note from Dr. Lawrence Merriweather, the historian who led the 1969 investigation. It reads simply, "Some historical questions must remain unanswered, not for lack of curiosity, but for lack of evidence. The Harcourt case represents one of those instances where we can reconstruct the outline of events, but never fully illuminate the human hearts that drove them. In the end, we are left with a tragedy born of a time when certain loves were forbidden, when human beings could be considered property, and when the rigid constraints of society forced human passion into destructive channels. Perhaps that is lesson enough." Today, the former Harcourt estate is a museum dedicated to antebellum Southern history. Visitors walk through the restored rooms, admire the period furniture, and listen to carefully sanitized accounts of life in the Old South. Few, if any, ever hear the story of the Harcourt sisters and Elijah Brooks. It remains a whisper in the archives, a footnote in county records, a ghost story told by locals on summer evenings. But for those who know where to look, who have read Anna's journal and studied the evidence, the estate tells a different story. The library, where forbidden conversations once took place. The cellar steps, where Lucille Harcourt's life ended. The distant woods where a hidden cabin once sheltered a man who could never show his face in daylight. The willow grove, now just a clearing in the trees, where Anna Harcourt chose to spend eternity. These places hold the echoes of a story too complex for simple judgment, too human for easy categorization, a story of desire, betrayal, and perhaps in its way, a strange and costly kind of love. A reminder that beneath the orderly surface of history lies the chaotic truth of human hearts, beating with wants and fears that no social order can fully contain. As the sun sets over the old Harcourt estate, shadows grow long across the grounds. In the gathering darkness, if one listens closely, perhaps the wind in the trees sounds almost like whispered conversations or confessions. But that, of course, is merely imagination. The dead tell no tales. They leave only fragments for the living to piece together, questions without answers, and stories that refuse to end neatly, continuing to haunt us across the years with their unresolved truths. And so the case of the Harcourt sisters remains closed, but not concluded, known but not understood, a tragedy without catharsis, a mystery without resolution. Just like so many human stories lost in the shadows of history, waiting for someone to listen closely enough to hear what might still be whispered on dark nights when the past feels closer than we care to admit. In the final analysis, perhaps what happened at Harcourt Estate in the summer of 1841 is less a ghost story than a cautionary tale about the dangers of forbidden desire, the destructive power of jealousy, and the terrible consequences that can unfold when human beings are denied their fundamental rights to love and freedom. The true horror lies not in supernatural elements, but in the very real human capacity for both profound connection and devastating betrayal. The wooden box with the lock of blonde hair and the torn page from Locke's treatise now rests in the County Museum's storage room, catalogued but rarely displayed. The curator who last handled it noted that even after all these years, the faded ink of Elijah's final message to Anna remains clearly legible. I forgive you. Do you forgive yourself? It is a question that echoes across time, unanswered. And perhaps that uncertainty, that ambiguity, is the most honest ending possible for a story born in a time of moral contradictions, played out in the shadows, where love and ownership, desire and domination, freedom and captivity blurred into something for which even now we have no adequate words. As historians continue to debate the true nature of what transpired at the Harcourt estate, certain details emerge from the shadows, adding complexity to an already troubling narrative. In 1954, during a cataloguing project at the Georgia State Archives, a researcher discovered a small, leather-bound ledger belonging to Dr. Samuel Whitmore, who had served as the county physician in Jefferson County from 1835 to 1862. The ledger contained medical records for prominent families in the region, including the Harcourts. An entry dated July 23, 1841, just weeks before Lucille Harcourt's death, noted a private consultation with the younger Miss Harcourt. The doctor's spidery handwriting records: Miss L.H. presents with symptoms consistent with early pregnancy. Patient refused to name the father, though her agitation suggests complicated circumstances. Recommended discretion and suggested a visit to relatives in the coming months. Patient declined, stating she would resolve the matter through alternative means. This discovery casts the subsequent events in a new and more troubling light. If Lucille Harcourt was indeed with child in the summer of 1841, the implications would have been catastrophic for the family's social standing, particularly if the father was who many scholars now suspect it might have been. According to the laws and social codes of antebellum Georgia, such a pregnancy would not merely have been scandalous, it would have been criminal. Further evidence comes from a series of financial records discovered in the Jefferson County Courthouse basement in 1961. These documents show that on August 1, 1841, Judge William Harcourt withdrew a substantial sum from his accounts at the Atlanta National Bank. A notation beside the withdrawal reads simply, "For L's situation." 3 days later, court records show that the judge requested an emergency leave of absence from his judicial duties, citing urgent family matters requiring immediate attention. The timing suggests that by early August, Judge Harcourt had become aware of his younger daughter's condition. His actions indicate plans to address the matter discreetly, perhaps by sending Lucille away until the child could be born and quietly placed with another family, a common, if unspoken, practice among wealthy families facing such circumstances. But something changed between August 4th and August 15th, when the judge returned unexpectedly from Atlanta. According to Anna's journal, it was Lucille's letter, containing accusations against Elijah, that prompted his return. But what the journal doesn't explain is why Lucille would take such drastic action when arrangements were apparently already being made to manage her situation discreetly. A possible answer comes from a fragment of a letter found pressed between the pages of Anna's journal, discovered during the 1963 renovation. The paper matches stationery known to belong to Lucille, and though the letter is incomplete, the visible portion reads, "Cannot bear the thought of being sent away like some shameful secret while you remain here with him. If father knew the full truth, that both his daughters had fallen into sin with the same." The remainder of the letter is missing, presumably destroyed by Anna after reading it. This fragment suggests a volatile situation in which Lucille, facing exile due to her pregnancy, turned her anger and jealousy toward her sister and Elijah. The letter to her father may have been an act of desperate revenge, meant to destroy the relationship between Anna and Elijah if she could not have him for herself. The household staff records, preserved in the estate's quarterly account books, add another layer to this complex picture. These records show that on August 14th, the day before the judge's unexpected return, Anna Harcourt instructed the housekeeper to prepare the carriage house for a journey, requesting that travel provisions for 2 people be made ready by the following evening. The housekeeper's notation indicates unusual secrecy surrounding these preparations and mentions that Miss Harcourt had requested the information be kept from her sister. These preparations, occurring just before the tragic events of August 15th, strongly suggest that Anna and Elijah had planned to flee together, perhaps after learning of Judge Harcourt's arrangements to send Lucille away. Their escape, however, was preempted by Lucille's letter and the judge's sudden return. What happened in the cellar on that fateful night remains unclear, but physical evidence documented in Sheriff Montgomery's report offers some clues that went unexamined at the time. The report notes that the straight razor found near Lucille's body belonged to Judge Harcourt's personal grooming set, which was kept in his private chambers. How it came to be in the cellar was never adequately explained. Perhaps most tellingly, the report includes a detail that seems insignificant at first glance. The deceased's right hand and sleeve were stained with ink, indicating she had been writing shortly before her death. This detail, when considered alongside Anna's journal entry about Lucille sending their father a letter with false accusations, raises the question of whether Lucille had gone to the cellar that night to confront Elijah, perhaps to pressure him into supporting her version of events, or to offer him a different proposal entirely. Additionally, the report mentions that the key to the cellar was found not in the lock, but on the floor near Lucille's body, suggesting she may have been the one who unlocked the door. In 1966, an architectural assessment of the former Harcourt estate discovered something that had been overlooked for more than a century: a narrow passage connecting the wine cellar to a small room beneath the library. This room, which contained a cot and showed evidence of long-term habitation, had no other entrance or exit. According to the architect's report, the passage had been disguised behind a wine rack and would have been nearly impossible to detect unless one knew of its existence. This discovery lends credence to a theory proposed by Dr. Eleanor Tate, a historian specializing in antebellum Southern history, who suggested in her 1972 paper, Shadows of Harcourt Estate, that Elijah Brooks may never have left the property on the night of August 15th. Instead, he may have hidden in this secret room, perhaps with Anna's knowledge and assistance, while the manhunt focused on the surrounding countryside. The body found hanging near the Savannah River, identified as Elijah based on clothing alone, may indeed have been a case of mistaken identity, or possibly a deliberate misdirection. Census records from 1840 show at least 4 other men matching Elijah's general description, who were reported as runaway from neighboring counties during that period. If this theory is correct, it raises the possibility that Elijah remained hidden on the Harcourt property, perhaps in this secret room, for some time after Lucille's death. This would explain the whispered conversations reported by household staff, which they attributed to Anna talking to herself. It might also explain why Anna, in her later years, was often seen walking to the Willow Grove at dusk, perhaps for clandestine meetings with someone who could only move about safely under cover of darkness. The cabin discovered in the woods in 1968, with evidence of habitation spanning from 1841 to the 1870s, adds further weight to this theory. Its location, 3 miles from the main house but still on Harcourt land, would have allowed its occupant to remain close while avoiding detection. The carbon dating of artifacts found there corresponds precisely with the period between Lucille's death and Anna's, suggesting that whoever lived in that cabin maintained a connection to the Harcourt estate throughout those decades. Among these artifacts was a collection of books that matched volumes missing from the Harcourt Library after Judge William's death. According to the inventory conducted for his estate in 1849, several works of philosophy, law, and literature had disappeared from the collection. The same titles were found in the cabin, suggesting Anna may have provided these books to whoever lived there. Perhaps most poignantly, archaeological excavation of the cabin site uncovered a small silver locket buried beneath the earthen floor. When opened, it contained a miniature portrait of a young woman whose features closely resemble those seen in the only surviving painting of Anna Harcourt, which now hangs in the Jefferson County Historical Society. On the reverse of the portrait, barely legible after decades underground, are the initials A.H. and the date August 15, 1841, the very day of Lucille's death. Was this locket a token given to Elijah on the night they had planned to escape together? Did it remain with him through decades of hidden existence, a reminder of both love and the terrible price paid for it? The archaeological report simply lists it as personal effect, silver locket with portrait, but the implications are profound for understanding the human story behind the historical facts. In the years following Judge Harcourt's death in 1849, Anna inherited the estate and made several significant changes to its operation. Estate records show that she gradually reduced the number of enslaved people on the property, selling some to neighboring plantations, but also, unusually for the time, granting manumission to others. Between 1850 and 1860, the number of enslaved individuals at Harcourt Estate decreased from 58 to 23. More tellingly, Anna established a trust fund in 1853, with instructions that upon her death, the remaining enslaved people on the estate should be freed and provided with funds for resettlement. This unusual arrangement, documented in legal papers filed with her attorney in Atlanta, included a specific provision that they should be settled in communities where they might live as free persons in truth, not merely in name. Such attitudes would have been considered radical in pre-Civil War Georgia, particularly coming from the daughter of a prominent judge. They suggest a profound change in Anna's perspective on the institution of slavery, a change that might well have stemmed from her personal experiences and relationships. During the Civil War, Harcourt Estate remained largely untouched by the conflict, protected by its remote location and perhaps by Anna's reputation for eccentricity. Local records indicate that she rarely entertained Southern officers and was known to turn away military personnel seeking quartering or provisions. A letter from a Confederate captain to his superior, dated February 1863, describes Miss Harcourt as unhelpful to the cause, and strangely indifferent to the threats posed by Northern aggression. The lady seems to exist in a world of her own making, concerned only with her books and her solitary walks. After the war, when many plantation owners struggled with the transition to free labor, Anna Harcourt adapted with surprising ease. Estate records show that she offered paid employment to many formerly enslaved people, establishing a contract labor system that, while not generous by modern standards, was considered fair for the time. Several families chose to remain on the property as paid workers, living in the former slave quarters, which, according to expense ledgers, Anna had renovated to provide more comfortable accommodations. This unusual arrangement drew comment from neighboring landowners. A letter from Richard Thornton, whose plantation bordered Harcourt land, to his brother in 1868, notes, "Our neighbor Miss Harcourt continues her peculiar ways, treating the former slaves as though they were hired hands on any northern farm. She takes meals with her house servants and has been seen reading to the children of her field workers in the evenings. Some whisper that she has lost her mind, but her business affairs remain shrewdly managed. I sometimes wonder if she knows something the rest of us do not. Throughout this period, Anna maintained her reclusive habits. She rarely travelled beyond the estate boundaries and, according to local accounts, received few visitors. The exception was a Dr. James Morrison, a physician who had taken over Dr. Whitmore's practice after the war. Estate ledgers show regular payments to Dr. Morrison for medical services, though Anna herself appears to have enjoyed robust health until her final illness. Intriguingly, these payments continued even during periods when Anna was not known to be ill. A notation in Dr. Morrison's medical daybook, preserved in the county historical collection, mentions regular consultations regarding the health of Miss Harcourt's associate residing at the Woodland property. This cryptic reference, dated 1870, provides one of the few documented acknowledgements of someone living in what must have been the cabin discovered by archaeologists nearly a century later. As Anna aged, her isolation increased. By 1870, most of the neighbouring families who had known her in her youth had either died or relocated following the economic devastation of the Civil War. The new society, emerging in Reconstruction-era Georgia, had little connection to or interest in the aging spinster living in her increasingly anachronistic estate. She became, as one local newspaper described her in an 1872 article about long-standing county families, a living relic of the old order, the last of the Harcourts, dwelling among the ghosts of a vanished world. In the final year of her life, Anna made several significant changes to her will and estate plans. In addition to the provisions for the freed people working her land, she established a trust to maintain the wooded section of her property in its natural state, undisturbed by development or agriculture, in perpetuity. This protected area encompassed both the willow grove, where she would be buried, and though it was not explicitly mentioned, the location of the cabin in the woods. She also made arrangements for regular deliveries of supplies, food, clothing, medicines, and books, to what she referred to as the woodland residence, with instructions that these deliveries should continue for as long as they are needed, without inquiry as to their purpose or recipient. These arrangements were entrusted to her attorney, with funds set aside to ensure their continuation. Anna Harcourt died on October 7, 1873, from what Dr. Morrison diagnosed as pneumonia complicated by general debility, consistent with advanced age. She was 55 years old. According to the doctor's notes, she remained lucid until the end, refusing his suggestion to send for a minister and insisting instead that there are matters I must settle directly with my Maker, without intermediaries. Her funeral was sparsely attended. Estate records show that most of those present were the freed people who had continued to work her land rather than members of white society. She was buried, as she had requested, beneath the willow grove on the eastern edge of the property, in a simple ceremony without religious officiation. 3 days after Anna's burial, Dr. Morrison made a final entry in his daybook regarding the Harcourt case. Visited the Woodland residence today to deliver news of Miss H's passing. Found the occupant already aware and in a state of profound grief. Offered medical assistance but was refused. When I suggested that with Miss H gone, there might be no reason to continue in isolation, I was told, "My confinement has long since ceased to be a matter of necessity and become instead one of habit and preference. The world has no place for me now, nor I for it. Left medicines and offered to return, but doubtful my services will be requested." This entry represents the last documented reference to whoever occupied the cabin in the woods. Archaeological evidence suggests that the cabin remained inhabited until approximately 1878, 5 years after Anna's death. After that, it appears to have been abandoned, though the structure itself remained standing until sometime in the early 20th century, when it collapsed due to natural decay. The Harcourt estate passed to a distant cousin after Anna's death, but the new owner showed little interest in maintaining it. By the turn of the century, the once grand plantation had fallen into disrepair. In 1925, the last private owner sold the property to Jefferson County for back taxes. It remained unused and largely forgotten until the historical preservation movement of the 1960s brought renewed interest in antebellum architecture and Southern history. Today, the restored Harcourt Mansion stands as a museum of plantation life, one of many such sites across the South. Visitors tour the grand rooms, admire the period furnishings, and listen to carefully curated narratives about Southern gentility and agricultural practices. Few are told about the two sisters who once lived there, or the man whose presence in their lives set in motion a tragedy that would echo across decades. The Willow Grove, where Anna Harcourt chose to be buried, has long since been reclaimed by the surrounding forest. No marker identifies her gravesite, though local legend holds that wildflowers bloom there more profusely than elsewhere in the woods. The cabin site is unmarked and unacknowledged on official tour maps, though occasionally a curious visitor might notice the subtle depression in the earth where its foundation once stood. As for Elijah Brooks, no definitive record of his fate exists beyond the sheriff's report of a body found hanging near the Savannah River, a report that, as we have seen, may well have been a case of mistaken identity. If, as the evidence suggests, he survived and lived out his life in hiding on Harcourt land, he did so as a ghost in historical terms, leaving behind only the faintest traces of his existence. The story of Anna and Lucille Harcourt and Elijah Brooks remains, at its heart, a human tragedy born of a time when certain kinds of love were forbidden not just by social custom, but by law. In the rigid hierarchy of antebellum Southern society, the desires and ambitions of two privileged young women collided with the fundamental right of a man to his own identity and freedom. The resulting catastrophe destroyed one life directly, altered two others irrevocably, and left behind questions that even now, more than a century and a half later, have no simple answers. Perhaps the most fitting epitaph for this story comes not from historical documents, but from a source closer to our own time. In 1971, an elderly woman named Clara Washington, identified as the granddaughter of former Harcourt estate workers, was interviewed for an oral history project on post-Civil War black communities in Jefferson County. When asked if she had ever heard stories about the Harcourt family from her grandparents, she replied, "My grandmother used to tell us about Miss Anna and the man in the woods. She said Miss Anna would send my grandmother with baskets of food and books, telling her to leave them at a certain hollow tree and walk away without looking back. But children are curious, you know. One time my grandmother hid and watched. She saw a man come for the basket, an older man, she said, but standing straight and dignified. My grandmother asked Miss Anna about him once, when she was very old and near her end. Miss Anna just looked at her for a long time and finally said, 'Some love costs more than it should. Some debts can never be repaid, but I would choose the same again, knowing the price.' My grandmother never asked again. She said some secrets aren't meant for telling. In the end, perhaps that is all we can know with certainty about what happened at Harcourt Estate in the summer of 1841 and the decades that followed. Beyond the documented facts lie human hearts with their complex desires and fears, their capacity for both selfishness and sacrifice. The truth, if it exists at all, lies somewhere in that ambiguous territory where love and possession, freedom and captivity, loyalty and betrayal blur into something for which we have no adequate language, even now. The Jefferson County Historical Society continues to maintain Anna Harcourt's journal and the other documents related to the case in its climate-controlled archives. Occasionally, a researcher or historian will request access, adding yet another interpretation or theory to the academic literature. But for most visitors to the restored Harcourt estate, the story remains untold, a whisper beneath the polished narrative of Southern history. As the sun sets over the old plantation grounds, shadows lengthen across the manicured lawns and reach into the surrounding woods. In that liminal space between day and night, it becomes almost possible to imagine two figures moving among the trees, a woman in the faded finery of another century, and a man whose identity was both his greatest vulnerability and his most precious possession. Not ghosts in the supernatural sense, but echoes of a human story that refuses to be silenced by time or convenient forgetting. And perhaps that persistence, that refusal to fade completely into historical obscurity, is itself a kind of justice, a testament to lives lived against the grain of their time, to loves that defied categorization, to human beings who, however imperfectly, reached across the artificial boundaries of race and status towards something genuine, even at terrible cost. In that sense, the story of the Harcourt sisters and Elijah Brooks belongs not just to the past, but to the ongoing human struggle to recognize and honor the dignity inherent in every life, to create a world where love does not require such devastating choices, and where no one's humanity is conditional or contingent. Until that world fully exists, their story remains not just a historical curiosity, but a mirror in which we might glimpse reflections of our own unfinished journey toward genuine human freedom. The leather-bound journal of Anna Harcourt, the scattered documents, the archaeological evidence, the oral histories, these fragments cannot give us the complete truth of what happened. But perhaps they offer something more valuable, a reminder that beneath the sanitized narratives of history lie complex human lives, full of contradictions and compromises, desires and fears, moral failures, and moments of grace. In acknowledging these complexities, we honor not just the specific individuals involved, but the fullness of our shared humanity across time. And so the story ends where it began, with questions rather than answers, with whispers rather than declarations. The willow grove stands silent. The cabin has returned to the earth. The grand house remains, preserved as a monument to a particular version of history. But for those willing to look beyond the official narratives, to read between the lines of documented fact, another story waits. A story of two sisters and the man they both loved, of jealousy and sacrifice, of a tragedy set in motion by desires that had no sanctioned outlet in their time and place. It is not a ghost story. There are no supernatural elements, no spectral appearances, no mysterious forces. The only haunting is that of human actions and their consequences, echoing across years and generations. And perhaps that is the most profound haunting of all, the recognition that history is not merely a record of events, but a complex web of human choices, each with ripples that extend far beyond their immediate moment. As the light fades over Jefferson County and stars appear above the former Harcourt estate, we leave Anna, Lucille, and Elijah to the judgment of history, or perhaps to a mercy beyond judgment, to an understanding that sees past the categories and constraints of their time, to the human hearts that beat beneath. Their story reminds us that the past is never as simple as we might wish it to be, that human lives resist easy categorization, and that sometimes the most important truths lie in the spaces between documented facts, in the silences and suggestions that official narratives cannot quite erase. In the end, that ambiguity might be the most honest memorial possible for three lives caught in the contradictions of their time, a recognition that their story, like so many human stories, remains forever unfinished, forever open to new interpretations, forever challenging us to look beyond the surface of history to the complex humanity that lies beneath.